Hi, my name's Cliff Freilich. I'm the Executive Director of Cinema St. Louis, and we are the presenters of the 29th Annual Whitaker St. Louis International Film Festival. We're really pleased to be joined by the directors of Queen of Hearts, Audrey Flack. Uh, we have a native of St. Louis, Rachel Reichman, who is one of the co-directors. Um, and then Deborah Shaffer is our other director. And we'll talk with both of them to see how that collaboration went. But let's start with the basic question, and that is, what are the origins of this particular film? Who had the idea? How did you two both come to collaborate eventually on the film?
Well, actually, neither of us originally had the idea. It was one of the producers, Amy Sultan, who had been also a partner of mine on my previous film. And she said to me one day, this is how I get into I've gotten into many films this way. She said, I've met somebody you have to make a film about. We have to make a film about her. And I'm like, okay, people say that all the time, but we met Audrey for coffee on the Upper West Side. And the short answer is, I mean, I kind of just fell in love with her right off the bat. She essentially told her whole life story. It was a wintry afternoon, and she kind of told us her whole life story in a nutshell over coffee. And I thought, this is a movie. There's a movie here. There's a story here. There's a real story that's worth doing on film here. And you always jump into these things not really knowing what you're getting into, because if you really knew, you might not do it. So it's a good thing that we do jump head first or feet first or whatever way we're jumping. And that is literally how it started. I said, okay, and we started shooting, and Audrey had a band performance coming up. That was the first official shoot in the beginning of the year. In January 2016 was the first, right after the first of the year. And Rachel came in a little later. I'll let Rachel tell her part of the story.
Okay, we'll shift over to you, Rachel. When do you enter the picture, so to speak? And you can now enter this picture.
I am sure it was a year after you guys started shooting. I'm pretty sure. Basically, Deb and I had the pleasure of working together on some PBS stuff. And we had a wonderful kind of connection. And I'll never forget the first scene I cut, where basically it was Deb gave me a bunch of material and she left, and she came back and she looked at this scene and she said, this is on the show at PBS about 6 years earlier. And she said, oh, that's a relief. Now I can really know I can work with you. And it was like, I'm sure Deb doesn't even remember this, but I remember it so well. And it was this amazing sort of, and for me, it was kind of a surprise. I'd never had a producer or director respond that way. But in any event, so Deb asked me to help them out with this when they were still raising money and hadn't really dug deep into building the story. And I was doing other stuff. So I thought it was interesting, but I didn't know if they were even going to finish the film. And also Deb's initial idea was to make a shorter movie, that she had a feeling about it. I guess it's okay to say that, right, Deb?
Sure.
Deb had a feeling that this was going to be a rock, because there's nothing worse than a movie that's too long. That's one of the beautiful things that Deb and I have a lot in common about, is we just can't stand flabby movies. And it's done all the time and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I came on board, helped out a little bit, doing other things. And, little by little, I got sort of seduced by the project. And in a similar way that Deb was, no, it was different. It was slower. And I did a trailer for them very early on. It was just 3 years ago. And whatever.
But I have to add something, because I fell in love with Audrey and her story, but I'm not an art historian. I'm not unknowledgeable about art. I've worked on a show called Art 21, Art in the 21st Century. I've done other art films, but I was not familiar with Audrey's work when I met her at all. I didn't, and I knew very little about photorealism. I knew more about abstract expressionism, of course, but it turns out, and Rachel can also buttress this, I knew that Rachel was a great editor. I didn't know that she had a really strong background in art history. And she brought a lot to this project in terms of, as she said, we didn't know really what the story was and how we were going to build it. And as we realized it wasn't just Audrey's, just her personal story, but that we also had to bring in what other artists were doing, what was going on contemporaneously in society, what was going on in the culture, what was going on in the art world. Rachel had been a fan of Audrey's when she was in high school. And that floored me. She had known Audrey's work as a teenager. And so Rachel
that's that great St. Louis education.
You know what? Can I jump in for one sec, Deb, on this? Because it's directly connected to the St. Louis Art Museum, which does own, now I'm just drawing a blank on which painting they own, but you know, the St. Louis Art Museum is a great museum, and my mom taught art in the St. Louis City Public Schools. And she would sometimes, when she was doing extra work, teaching college, evening classes or something like that, I'd have to go hang out at the museum while she was circulating with her students. So this is in grade school. So for me, it's not a legit education in art history. It was a completely organic from, you know, for me, that's church. That's where I grew up, was in the art museum. And at 16, of course, I was going to be a photorealist painter. For, you know, what one falls in love with at 16. For 3 months, you do this, and for 3 months, you're going to be a rock and roll saxophone player, and, you know, then you're going to be a symphony conductor. And, you know, for 3 months, I was going to paint photorealist paintings. And I made, I think, 2 of them, you know, which is amazing. I could accomplish 2 of them in 3 months, because as Audrey said, her paintings take a year or 2. But I was crazy about her work at 16. And then I went on and got involved in film.
That's a remarkable coincidence that years later, you come back to the person that inspired you at 16.
Yeah.
So
yep. It was lucky, and it was a lucky collaboration in the end. You know, I think we're both, well, you can see we still get along. We never really had like, you know, as we've said, we've never had a really big fight. We disagreed about things here and there, and we tussled over whether certain things should be in the film or out of the film, or what direction to go. And you know, those things are normal, but we never had, like, you know, a really bad disagreement or unpleasant disagreement the whole time we were working together.
Well, that too is remarkable, of course. Audrey, and you referenced this, have referenced this already, is a pretty remarkable figure in the sense that her work spans so many different kinds of art, and she had these various important other artists who intersected with her over time. So you were able to sort of tell the history of art, contemporary art, through her and her relationships with those figures. So I was just curious, you know, again, you didn't have much knowledge going in. You know, were you surprised to discover all of those sorts of connections?
Yeah, I think yes. Yes, is the short answer. I mean, it just was, we kept learning things about her. We still keep learning things about her. You know, projects she's done, or people she's known, or places she's been. I mean, the paintings she did, you know, when she was in Italy, which are in the film. And I mean, her work is really rich and really diverse. And we're still discovering things. She's still painting. Is literally doing a whole kind of new kind of painting now for her. She's changed directions yet again.
From the material that you were showing in the film as well? I mean, has she shifted again?
Taking off from the painting that we see in the beginning of the film and at the end, the one with the Rubens, the Garden of Love painting. She's done more, and it's in the show, actually. We do see in the show, we see some paintings in the background. But she's done more. She's done a big new one called, I think was called Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. She might have changed the title. It's the one that at the very end of the painting is a blank canvas. That one's done and sold. And she started new work. She's working. I mean, the pandemic is, in a way, for studio artists, you know, they get in the studio more.
It's a motive force. It's something to do to distract
And
you, obviously.
you know, I should mention, I hope it's okay to, the film is actually opening theatrically, virtually, kind of nationwide on November 13th. So, you know, Audrey's just, it's thrilling for us that Audrey's being, you know, Audrey's being more recognized. I mean, that was part of the point of the film, was to raise her profile, hopefully. And Rachel should tell a story of what happened recently when she went to the reopening of the Museum of Modern Art. I think on the first day it reopened, right?
I was there pretty close. Members, actually, I'll just throw a plug in here. People who have, artists that have work in the MoMA collection were invited to come first. And which I have two films in the collection. So I went that day and there was no one there. It was like extraordinary. And I love MoMA. And I went up to see, we were looking at various things, arrived on the 5th floor, and boom, there was, for the first time in probably 30, 40 years, Leonardo's Lady, right at the top of the stairs and in beautiful view. I would pull up a photo now, but I don't think I could get to it fast enough for you. I'll send it to you. And it just looked breathtaking.
Audrey didn't know they were going to hang it. She didn't know it was going to be hung in the Rachel sent us a selfie of herself in front of the painting.
We were so excited.
Well, I confess that as a viewer of the film, I had a vague notion of the name Audrey Flack, but I really didn't have a clear sense of her work. And then as I started seeing her work in the film, I realized that I had seen many of these paintings in various museums that I've been to in the past, and I've always very much been taken by her photorealist work. So it was great to then sort of match that work with the person who created it. And she truly is an amazing woman too. The challenges that she faced, which you discuss in the film, as a woman in the art world at the time that she entered it, it was, I suspect things haven't improved dramatically even now, but certainly at that time, she had to fend off, obviously, the depredations of various artists, male artists, and trying to establish a true reputation and be taken seriously was very much of a difficult proposition when she began making that work. You want to talk a little bit about that aspect of her career?
Well, I mean, I think you're right. I think it was a terrible, terrible, terrible struggle for women when she was starting out. And, you know, like everything else that's come along with this sort of second wave feminist movement that started in the 70s, things have improved and they haven't. I have a clipping on the table here that I took out of the New York Times saying that a survey had just been done of, I think out of 87% of museums that had been surveyed, 85% of the work in the museums was by white men. I mean, that is still true today. It is still, you know, it's better, but it's still a struggle. There's still terrible discrimination, you know, against women in every field. I mean, certainly in the film world, in probably less so in documentary directing, less so in editing, which is, hello, that's why we're here, because, you know, that was a place, I mean, I didn't set out to become a filmmaker. I fell into film through political work, but documentary film was open to women. I think the same way certain professions were always open to women, it was considered very lesser. When I started in documentary in the early 70s, it was not a well-respected, you know, it's not like now. When you tell people now you make documentaries, they're like, wow, oh, you do. But when I started, if I would tell people I made documentaries, they were like, oh.
Those boring things.
So it was available to us because it was not desirable. And I think editing has always been available to women in Hollywood, across the boards.
Yeah, well, there's some the greatest of editors in film history are, of course, women. Margaret Booth, Dee Dee Allen. There's any number of people in the field. So you can go on and on. I could defer to Rachel. I'm sure she can name them even more. So yes, that was one of the rare opportunities for women to really assert creative control.
And now I think I just want to also add, I think I just got asked, I got a survey, we're applying for certain awards with the film, and we had to fill out, what percentage of our above the line and below the line was fit certain diversity categories and gender, and nobody asked about age. So I made a little note about it, because I think obviously there's tremendous discrimination in Hollywood against older people, and especially older women. And I think it's true in documentaries too. It's true in production. It's true across the boards. It's another category that we have to, that's why Audrey is so remarkable. She's 89 now, and
Wow.
she's a role model for me. That's also actually personally one of it was a real inspiration. I was, thinking of, how do you keep going? How do you keep doing this how do you age in this profession? And so that was a big motivating factor for me, was looking at Audrey as an inspiration for you just keep doing it.
And obviously, your background initially was in political film. I realize you've done much diverse work, but the Wobblies, of course, is one of your major docs early on. But this film is political too. Obviously, Audrey and her career is political in the sense that she's establishing the possibilities that unfortunately were all too often denied women in the past. She's breaking those barriers, and not just in the art field, but the fact that she had an autistic daughter that she had to also cope with at the same time she was trying to establish and further her career. That makes it even more crazy that she was able to accomplish so much, because there was no support being given then. And again, it remains problematic even today, but then nothing.
And she was a single mom for part of the time, and poor, and had 2 children. I mean, it's remarkable. That,
Yeah,
it's interesting. I just want to go back to one thing you also said, because one lesson from the early 70s, from the women's movement of the 70s, which was very formative for me too. The biggest lesson I probably took out of that time is the personal is political. Politics isn't something that happens over there that affects other people. Everything, that was the big lesson of that second wave women's movement, is that what happens in the kitchen is political. What happens in the bedroom is political. It's about power dynamics and about, roles and responsibilities and true equality and true sharing. And that stayed with me also. That was formative. And yes, so in that sense, of course, this film is extremely political.
Rachel, you were going to weigh in with a point, I believe.
Well, I just was saying that she was a single mom for a period of time, and that was very tough. But also her first husband was having trouble making money, which you guys kind of skirted through, or rather was sort of relevant to what you were talking about, that, he wasn't going to step in and help with the kids, even if she was going to step in and go out and get a job. And also that it was completely forbidden for her to ever mention that she even had children. And she did tell one story about one of the first openings when she was beginning photorealism, big, lovely gallery on, Madison Avenue, and they were having an opening, and it was really exciting. And she basically had to keep an eye on the clock because the babysitter had to get out of there at X, and everybody else was going to go out drinking and celebrating, and it was her opening, and she could not go. And she could not say, I need to go home and take care of my kids. So it really had a big impact on her life. The other thing, though, is one thing you started to talk about, Cliff, is the issue of how it was understood that to have power in the art world, you would sleep with everybody. And everyone did, but Audrey really didn't want to. And it may have cost her some power. I don't know. I mean, we know there are some people who vicariously got access because of their lovers or husbands or something like that. And, she really had opportunities that were just the result of her own wherewithal. And she made choices, which she talked about. There was another person that she was, approached by in a way that was a little bit inappropriate, which we left out of the film. But there's another story.
There are always many stories, as Audrey says. You're never the only one. And there's never just one. I mean, I'm sure Rachel and I each have dozens of stories we could tell you. You just don't get through this without those stories.
Sadly, I'm afraid that's true. I'm curious now, Audrey had such a long and diverse career. Is there a particular part of that career that you are especially fond of? Do you like them all equally?
That's a tricky question. I love her. I must say, though, I love her abstract expressionist work. I think it's just, I think all of her work is beautiful. But that was a surprise to me when you asked before, what did I discover? The fact that she was not just sort of while she was in school, she was a really fantastic abstract expressionist painter, and she's a fabulous drawer. Her drawings are still, so there's aspects, that's what I'm intrigued by, are these all these really diverse aspects of what she can do. And do you know, one thing she regretted, she still berates us for not having included her band, which I alluded to early on. She has a band called the History of Art Band. She plays the banjo, she writes the songs, and there are these funny songs about Van Gogh, about Jackson Pollock, about Rodin, about all these sort of male chauvinist, whatever. They're very funny. And it was such a different tone. We couldn't find a place for it. And we were able to include the scene of her playing the banjo with her daughter and the violin, and that her other daughter, Hannah, didn't really want to be interviewed, and we really wanted Hannah in the film. So, we couldn't do you can't do everything. So Audrey still, every now and then she'll say, but you didn't include the band.
Well, that's a great Blu-ray extra.
That's what I keep telling her.
You should have used something under the credits.
It's so different. You would when you see it on the Blu-ray extra, it's true. But what would it be? I don't know. We actually tried. We tried to sort of close out with a coda. It just didn't work.
Yeah, it did.
Rachel, you didn't answer the question yet with regard to, do you have, obviously you fell in love with her photorealist work as a youngster. Does that remain the part of her career that you find most intriguing?
Well, similarly to Deb, I did find the ABEX work surprisingly rich and gorgeous. And of course, I'd never seen any of it. And it's really beautiful for someone who's virtually a student at that point in time. It's very mature work. But I hadn't looked at that photorealist work for 30 years, at least, since I was a kid. And I didn't think twice about it. And then she was included in the scene that we opened the film with, where she, it's not the first scene in the studio, but a little bit around the title sequence. She's in the Parish Museum on Long Island in the Hamptons. And they had a beautiful photorealist show about 2 years ago. And I went out there at the time, maybe it was a little more than 2 years to before I really, just at the beginning of my work, beginning to work closely with Deb. And I was completely blown away by that painting. The Wheel of Fortune. I was just knocked across the room. It's in real life, these paintings are so striking. And you know, I understand people's problems with photorealism, and I understand people's problems with Audrey's work. You know, I mean, that's one of the reasons we weren't interested in doing some sort of lionizing, sycophantic, oh, you know, glory, 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 whatever, because we are not naive. But the work is just electrifying. It is so fresh and so intense. And just to return to the story of coming up the escalator on the 5th floor of MoMA 2 months ago, whenever, 6 weeks ago, I was just knocked over when I saw this Leonardo's lady, because I'd never, you know, most of them, you can't see them in real life. They're around the country, and on film, you know, that's why when Deb went to Philly, or actually to shoot
The World War II. Yeah, World War II in Philadelphia.
We had to have bodies in the shot. So you could, because it's one thing to say, this is an 8-foot tall painting, but it's like, you know, okay, whatever. But when, you know, you get up next to these things and the luminosity is just exhilarating. It's shocking. They look like they were painted yesterday. And for me, actually, I will say, and seeing the film, I didn't go to the shoot in Philly of World War II. I was so moved by it. That painting is just, it's so moving. That clash, that collision between the bourgeois mundane and the horror, you know, lying underneath middle-class life around the world, you know. And it could be a newspaper that someone's reading while they're eating their, you know, pastries for breakfast or lunch, you know, but the photos are laying there in the, anyway, it just blew my mind. Moving.
Well, great. Let's wrap things up with the fact that we do have some St. Louis connections. So let's probe those just ever so slightly. One of the executive producer of the film is Mary Strauss. How did she become involved in the production?
You want me to tell that story?
Yeah, you have to.
Okay, should I tell the real story?
You can tell whichever one you want.
Okay. I don't know, do we have a fake story?
No, we don't.
Basically, when I met Audrey about 2 years ago, whenever it was, at her house, which was really cool. You know, I didn't really think about it. We just went over there. We were going to do whatever. And it was powerful. It was interesting. And she's got amazing chemistry. She's just a really charismatic individual in a very understated way. She said, she asked me about myself. Oh, St. Louis. Oh, you know what? She had just done a conversation at the St. Louis Art Museum maybe 2.5, 3 years ago that Mary Strauss was in charge of, or had organized that conversations with women artists. And she said, oh, Mary Strauss, she's the greatest. You should get in touch with her. You need money for the film? Call her. And I was like, I would never do that. Now, it turns out when I was a child, you know, it's just like New York City. The people in the arts and literature and bookstores and the university was a very small clique. And my mom knew Mary Strauss, but just sort of in the way, you know, like your neighbors. And so Mary knew who I was, and I reached out to her. And I said, we're making this film and we need executive producers to come on board. And I sent her the film and she loved it. She just loved it. And she got involved with us financially. And we were really grateful. It was at a time we really needed it.
Mary, of course, comes from an art background. That's what she studied. And she's a great supporter of the St. Louis International Film Festival. As you likely know, she was not quite one of the founders, but she was absolutely instrumental in allowing the festival to survive and then ultimately to thrive. Without her support, it just wouldn't have been possible. So it was really nice to see that. But it was all, and then, of course, your connection, Rachel, as a former St. Louis, and made the film particularly attractive. But I want to hasten to add that none of that would have been enough to say, well, we're going to play the film even if I hate it. And indeed, I instead loved it, which made it a very simple decision to say, yes, let's play the film. So let's end things then now with, and I hate to ignore Deb, but we want to make certain that people recognize, if they're watching this early on in the festival, that Rachel's going to be part of a master class called Behind the Camera with Rachel Reichman. That will be taking place at 1 p.m. on November 15th. It'll be a live streamed event. And if you want more information about her films outside of her documentary work and her editing work, she came out of feature filmmaking and narrative filmmaking, and she has very generously allowed us to have a supplement to the masterclass in which you can see her 2 narrative shorts and 2 narrative features made back in late 70s, 80s. And I strongly recommend that you do that and then join us for this class. And she'll talk more at that point, but give us just a taste from the point of view of your where you came from in St. Louis. And of course, we had this conversation, so it's a little unusual, but everyone in St. Louis always asks the required question, where did you go to high school? So answer that for us.
Oh, first I have to say I went to Flynn Park, for which does Flynn Park grade school exist anymore?
I can't tell you definitively.
Okay, well, for all of you out there, and who are especially my generation, I went to Flynn Park, went to Hanley Junior High, and of course I went to U City High School. I grew up in U City, easy walking distance from WashU, where of course we got into lots of trouble all the time. Everyone in my family went to WashU except me, because I was, basically there was one place I was going to go the second high school ended, and that was New York. And of course I just got on the first, actually took a train. It was wonderful. But in those days you could do that. So yeah, that's, is there anything else you want to know? I mean, it was a great place to grow up. U City was, and Webster, and we used to go to Webster to see crazy avant-garde and interesting films. I told you about the story of John Waters' films, being arrested, Pink Flamingos. They confiscated the print, and it was good though. But there were I ran into David Bowie at Balaban's when I was about 13, and my family was down there. We were having dinner, and he was there with his band on the streets of the Central West End because he'd been playing over at Kiel. And yeah, it was fun.
We actually have a film about Bowie's early years before he was David Bowie called Stardust in the festival.
Oh, terrific. And Streetside Records, absolutely loved it. Spent a lot of money there. The libraries, the public library. And in fact, the public library behind the library on Delmar became where I went to go to 6th grade, called the 6th grade center. But now I'm getting really down the rabbit hole, so I'm going to resist.
All right. And Deb's probably saying, when is she going to wrap up now?
I know, it's tempting though. Go down memory lane.
Well, you'll get to hear a little bit more about that since obviously you'll be exploring your roots in film and how you became enchanted by film in general as part of your masterclass. So please join us on November 15th. Thank you both so much. This was a fun conversation. I'm really happy that you were able to carve out the time to do this. Deb, would you like to have a parting? We'll give you an opportunity to say a parting word since we've excluded you here for the last 5 minutes.
I just wanted to say thank you. I wanted to say thank you to the festival for inviting the film, and thank you to you for doing this. It's our pleasure. We love doing this. We love, the Zoom thing, we were talking in the beginning about how the Zoom thing in a way has enabled more people to talk. We can meet more people this way. You can meet more people this way. But we really miss our live audience. I really, 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 really miss seeing the film with everybody who's watching and hearing you in the theater and hearing you laugh and hearing you cry and sniffle and just being, I don't know, that's, you know, that's been heartbreaking to not be able to be there in person with everybody. But, you know, this has its beauty, and thank you.
Thank you. And yes, we agree wholeheartedly, and we certainly want to be back doing live in-person events at some point soon, but I fear we may be 2022 before that actually occurs. Let's hope that that's not the case, but I think we have to be prepared for it. All right. Well, thank you again, to end on that less than hopeful note. But thanks again. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you.